"I'd rather die," the mountain black woman declared, her voice cutting through the desert heat as the weathered cowboy's 3 silver coins struck the auction block with finality. The crowd at Morrison's trading post shifts uncomfortably. Some sneer at her defiance, others whisper about the mountain witch, who brings nothing but trouble. She's meant to be broken by now, another casualty of the harsh territory, sold off like livestock to whoever will take her. But when the cowboy steps forward, his haunted eyes suggest he's not here for ownership. He's running from ghosts that match her own. What neither the jeering crowd nor the corrupt officials overseeing this illegal auction realize is that both the woman and the cowboy harbor secrets that could unravel a conspiracy spanning 3 territories, with dozens of families' lives hanging in the balance. The question burns in the scorching air. Will this $3 transaction become the key to their mutual destruction, or their only path to redemption? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The sun beat down mercilessly on Morrison's trading post as Althea Jackson approached the weathered wooden platform. Dust swirled around her worn boots with each deliberate step. She had walked into this trap willingly. For 3 months, she had tracked the illegal slave trade network across Colorado territory. Her leather satchel contained detailed notes about corrupt officials, fake documentation, and families who had vanished. The evidence would shut down the entire operation. But first, she needed to witness this auction firsthand. The auctioneer, a thin man with yellowed teeth, called for attention. A small crowd gathered under the blazing afternoon sun. Most were rough frontier types looking for cheap labor. Others seemed uncomfortable but stayed out of morbid curiosity. Althea studied each face. She memorized clothing, scars, and the way they held themselves. Every detail would go into her report to the federal marshals. 2 families huddled near the platform. A mother clutched her young son while her husband stood with his hands bound. Another family pressed close together, their eyes filled with terror. These were free people who had been captured and would be sold illegally back into bondage. The injustice burned in Althea's chest. 22 years had passed since emancipation. Yet this evil persisted in remote territories where law enforcement remained sparse. Silas McGovern emerged from the trading post's shadow. The territorial official wore a clean suit despite the desert heat. His presence made everything official, legitimate in the eyes of these buyers. Althea had been hunting McGovern for months. McGovern's cold eyes swept over the crowd before settling on Althea. Something flickered across his face. Suspicion, perhaps. She had been careful to maintain her cover as a drifting woman down on her luck, but word traveled fast in small frontier communities. The auction began with the first family. Bids came quickly. $50 for the father, $30 for the mother, $20 for the boy. Althea's hands clenched as she watched free American citizens sold like cattle. She stepped forward when her turn came. The crowd's energy shifted. Some had heard whispers about the mountain woman who brought strange luck, both good and bad. Others called her a witch behind her back. The auctioneer struggled to generate interest. Bidders shook their heads or looked away. Word had spread that she caused nothing but trouble for anyone who tried to control her. The price dropped steadily. $40, $25, $15, $10. Humiliation washed over her as the auctioneer's voice grew desperate. She was worth less than a decent horse in these people's eyes, less than a plow or a bag of seed corn. $3. The final bid hung in the air like a curse. $3 was the price of a sick mule or a broken wagon wheel. It was an insult to human dignity itself. Althea's voice cut through the desert silence. From the edge of the crowd, a tall figure stepped forward. Jedediah Calloway had been watching from beneath the trading post's narrow shade. His weathered face showed years of hard living under the frontier sun. Scars marked his hands and a limp favored his left leg. Jed had followed rumors of illegal slave auctions to this remote outpost. The guilt that drove him here weighed heavier than his travel pack. 3 years ago, his cavalry unit had raided what they thought was a hostile camp. Instead, they found peaceful families. In the confusion and darkness, shots were fired. A child died. The memory haunted every step he took. He had been seeking some way to balance the scales of justice ever since. Jed pulled $3 from his pocket. The coins felt heavier than they should as he placed them on the auction block. The auctioneer smiled with relief. At least one sale would go through without trouble. But Jed surprised everyone by immediately cutting the ropes that bound Althea's wrists. He pressed the 3 coins into her freed hands. The crowd murmured in confusion. McGovern stepped closer, his hand resting on his gun belt. This was not how these transactions typically concluded. Althea studied Jed's face carefully. She had learned to read people during her years as a schoolteacher before taking on this dangerous investigation. Most men who bought women at illegal auctions had cruelty in their eyes. This man carried guilt instead. McGovern's voice carried clear threat as he demanded to know Jed's intentions. A man who freed his purchase immediately raised uncomfortable questions about the entire proceeding. The other buyers grew restless. If this auction was somehow illegitimate, they could face federal prosecution for participating. The atmosphere grew tense as hands moved closer to weapons. Althea made her choice. She had gathered enough evidence to prove this location's guilt. But she needed help to escape with her documentation intact. More importantly, she needed someone with frontier skills to help her reach the other auction sites before the network could be warned. She revealed her true mission to Jed in careful, quiet words. The leather journal hidden in her dress contained names, dates, and locations of the entire illegal operation. Federal marshals were waiting for her complete report. Jed understood immediately. His cavalry experience had taught him to recognize important intelligence when he saw it. This woman was not a victim. She was a soldier in a war against injustice. McGovern sensed something wrong in their whispered conversation. He signaled his men to surround them both. The crowd began backing away as the situation turned dangerous. The 3 families still awaiting sale watched with desperate hope. If Althea's mission succeeded, they might see freedom again. If it failed, they would disappear forever into illegal bondage. Jed's hand moved to his rifle as McGovern's men closed in. $3 had purchased more than anyone expected. The question remained whether that price would lead to justice or tragedy. McGovern's men formed a loose circle around Althea and Jed. The territorial official's clean suit seemed out of place among the dust and tension. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. The crowd sensed violence approaching. Most began retreating toward their horses and wagons. Others lingered, hungry for entertainment. The 3 families huddled together, understanding that their fate hung in the balance of whatever happened next. Althea felt the weight of her hidden journal against her ribs. Months of dangerous investigation had led to this moment. The evidence she carried could destroy the illegal slave trade network across 3 territories, but only if she survived to deliver it. Jed positioned himself slightly in front of her, his rifle held ready but not quite aimed. His cavalry training showed in how he assessed threats and escape routes. The trading post's layout offered few advantages: too much open ground, too many armed men. McGovern stepped closer, his hand resting on his pistol grip. He had been running illegal auctions for 2 years without interference. No federal marshals had ever appeared at his remote locations. No investigations had touched his operation. Until now. The territorial official demanded to know why Jed had freed his purchase immediately. Legitimate buyers wanted to recoup their investment through labor. They did not hand money back to the people they had just bought. Althea made her decision. Her cover was already blown. McGovern's suspicion proved that her careful disguise had failed. The only path forward led through the truth. She pulled the leather journal from its hiding place beneath her worn dress. The small book contained detailed records of every illegal auction site she had infiltrated. Names, dates, descriptions, and witness accounts filled nearly 200 pages of careful documentation. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Some buyers realized they had been participating in federal crimes. Others grew angry at being deceived. The atmosphere shifted from tense to explosive as everyone understood the stakes had changed completely. Althea's voice cut through the desert heat as she revealed her true identity. She was not a drifting woman seeking work. She was a federal investigator working directly with territorial marshals. The journal contained enough evidence to prosecute everyone present. McGovern's face went pale beneath his weathered tan. He had built his fortune on the assumption that remote locations remained beyond federal reach. The idea that investigators could infiltrate his operation had never occurred to him. Jed spoke for the first time since paying the $3. His words were measured and careful. He explained his presence as a former cavalry scout seeking to make amends for past mistakes. The unit he had served with had accidentally caused civilian deaths during a confused nighttime raid. The memory still woke him most nights. A child's cry cut short by gunfire. Families scattered in terror. His tracking skills had led the cavalry to what they thought was a hostile camp. Instead, they found innocent people trying to survive on the harsh frontier. Althea recognized the genuine remorse in his weathered features. Her years as a schoolteacher had taught her to read faces accurately. This man carried guilt that matched her own sense of responsibility for the families she was trying to save. Their alliance formed in that moment of shared purpose. She needed protection and frontier skills to complete her mission. He needed a chance to use his abilities for justice instead of destruction. McGovern sensed the shift in dynamics. Two people working together posed a far greater threat than one woman with a journal. He signaled his men to move closer, intending to seize the evidence and eliminate the witnesses. The families watched with desperate hope. If the investigation succeeded, they might return to their children and communities. If it failed, they would disappear into illegal bondage with no hope of rescue. Jed's military experience kicked in as he assessed their tactical situation. Too many enemies in too much open ground, but McGovern's men were spread out and overconfident. A coordinated escape might succeed if they moved quickly enough. Althea understood his unspoken plan. She had been preparing for this moment throughout her investigation. Her satchel contained not just evidence, but also emergency supplies for rapid travel across difficult terrain. The first gunshot shattered the desert silence. McGovern had grown tired of talking and decided to end the threat permanently, but his shot went wide as Jed tackled Althea behind the auction platform. Chaos erupted as buyers scattered in all directions. Horses reared and whinnied in terror. Dust clouds rose from dozens of fleeing feet. The organized auction dissolved into panicked retreat. Jed used the confusion to guide Althea toward the horses tied behind the trading post. His cavalry training served them well as he identified the fastest mounts and cut their tethers with quick knife work. McGovern's men struggled to maintain formation amid the chaos. They had expected easy targets, not a coordinated escape by people with military skills and detailed planning. Althea grabbed her evidence satchel and swung onto a sturdy mare. Jed mounted a powerful gelding that looked capable of carrying them across the rough terrain ahead. Their partnership had been forged in crisis, bonded by shared purpose and mutual necessity. The three families called out desperately as Althea and Jed prepared to ride away. They understood that their only hope of freedom was escaping with these two unlikely allies. But McGovern's men were regrouping quickly. Pursuit would begin within minutes. The evidence that could bring down the entire network would mean nothing if they died in the desert with their secrets. Jed spurred his horse toward the rocky hills where cavalry experience would give them advantages over local toughs. Althea followed, clutching her journal and praying that $3 silver had purchased enough time to deliver justice. The chase began as dust clouds rose against the merciless sun. The desert wind scattered pages from Althea's journal across the rocky terrain. During their escape from Morrison's trading post, McGovern's men had managed to tear her satchel, sending months of careful documentation flying like autumn leaves. Jed guided them into a narrow canyon where his cavalry experience gave them tactical advantage. The walls provided cover while funneling any pursuit into predictable paths. His years of frontier scouting had taught him to read landscape like other men read books. Althea dismounted and began collecting the scattered evidence. Each page represented families torn apart by the illegal slave trade. Names, dates, locations, and witness testimonies filled her careful handwriting. Without this documentation, federal marshals would lack the proof needed for prosecution. The wind threatened to carry more pages beyond reach. Jed helped gather what they could find while keeping watch for McGovern's men. His military training made him naturally protective of mission-critical intelligence. As they worked, Althea explained how she had infiltrated the slave trade network. Her background as a schoolteacher had prepared her for investigation work. Reading people's faces and detecting deception came naturally after years in the classroom. She had lost her own sister to this same illegal trade 2 years earlier. Federal authorities claimed insufficient evidence to pursue the case. That injustice had driven Althea to gather proof herself, no matter the personal risk. Jed shared his own burden as they organized the recovered pages. 3 years ago, his cavalry unit had received reports of hostile activity near a remote settlement. He had tracked the supposed threats through difficult terrain, leading his men directly to what they believed was an enemy camp. The raid had gone wrong in the darkness. Confused shouts, gunfire, screaming. When dawn revealed the truth, they found peaceful families who had been trying to survive the harsh frontier. His tracking skills had led to the death of innocent people, including a young girl. The memory haunted him every day. He had left the cavalry immediately afterward, unable to bear wearing the uniform that reminded him of his failure. The guilt followed him across 3 territories as he searched for some way to balance the scales. Althea understood his pain. They both carried responsibility for harm that had come to innocent people. Her investigation had put families at risk even as she tried to save them. His skills had caused tragedy when he meant to provide protection. Their partnership deepened as they worked together to reconstruct her evidence. She taught him to read the names and locations in her careful script. He showed her how to navigate using landmarks and star positions for nighttime travel. They decided to pose as husband and wife to avoid suspicion at the remaining auction sites. The deception would be purely practical, allowing them to move freely through frontier communities where single women faced constant harassment. The first test came at Copper Creek, a mining town where McGovern's network operated monthly auctions. Jed's weathered appearance and military bearing helped them blend in with other couples seeking cheap labor for their claims. Althea observed everything while pretending to examine the people being sold. She memorized faces, documented the corrupt officials present, and noted which local businesses participated in the illegal trade. Her teaching experience made her naturally observant of human behavior. The auction proceeded exactly like the others she had witnessed. Free families were sold as if they were property, their legal documents destroyed or ignored. Children were separated from parents. Husbands and wives were sold to different buyers. Jed struggled to maintain his cover as he watched the injustice unfold. His military training had taught him to protect innocent people. Staying silent while families were destroyed tested his self-control to its limits. After the auction, they gathered testimony from local residents who opposed the trade but feared speaking out publicly. Althea's gentle questioning techniques, developed during her teaching years, helped people share their experiences without feeling threatened. They learned that McGovern was systematically warning other auction sites about potential federal investigation. Their escape from Morrison's trading post had compromised the entire operation. Time was running short before the network could relocate or destroy evidence. The pattern repeated at 3 more locations over the following weeks. Each auction site provided additional documentation, but McGovern's influence was spreading ahead of them. Witnesses disappeared. Records were burned. Local officials suddenly became uncooperative. Jed's tracking skills proved invaluable for staying ahead of McGovern's men while moving between locations. His knowledge of military tactics helped them avoid ambushes and identify safe camping spots. The partnership was working, but the stakes kept rising. At Silver Ridge, they discovered that children were being separated from families and sent to work camps in remote locations. The scope of the operation was far larger than Althea had originally suspected. Hundreds of people were trapped in illegal bondage across the territory. Jed's protective instincts intensified when he saw children being sold. The memory of the young girl who had died during his failed cavalry raid made him desperate to prevent more harm to innocent families. They began documenting the work camp locations, adding another layer to the federal case. But each new discovery made their mission more dangerous. McGovern's network had resources and political connections that reached far beyond local law enforcement. Their investigation led them toward the territorial capital, where the largest auctions took place monthly. The evidence they had gathered pointed to corruption at the highest levels of government. Federal marshals would need overwhelming proof to overcome such political protection. As they prepared for the most dangerous part of their mission, both Althea and Jed understood that failure would mean more than their own deaths. Hundreds of families would remain trapped in illegal slavery, and justice would never come to those responsible for destroying so many lives. The territorial capital waited ahead like a fortress of corruption that only truth could breach. The territorial capital sprawled beneath them like a maze of corruption and opportunity. Althea and Jed studied the town from a rocky overlook, planning their approach to the largest auction site in the network. 3 months of investigation had led them to this moment. Clara May's Inn sat prominently on Main Street, its cheerful yellow paint and welcoming porch seeming to promise safety to weary travelers. The establishment had earned a reputation for helping people in distress, particularly families displaced by frontier hardships. Althea felt exhausted after weeks of constant travel and danger. The prospect of a clean bed and hot meal appealed to both of them. More importantly, Clara May was known for her connections throughout the territory. Information flowed through her inn like water through a riverbed. They approached as husband and wife, their cover story well rehearsed after successful use at previous locations. Jed carried their travel packs while Althea clutched her reconstructed journal of evidence. The documentation had grown thicker with each auction site they investigated. Clara May greeted them warmly at the inn's front door. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her genuine smile and motherly demeanor immediately put them at ease after weeks of suspicion and danger. The innkeeper offered them her best room and insisted on preparing a special dinner. She asked gentle questions about their travels, showing particular interest in their experiences at various frontier communities. Her curiosity seemed natural for someone who made her living by caring for travelers. Over the meal, Clara May shared local gossip and territorial news. She mentioned concerns about illegal activities in remote areas, expressing sympathy for families who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Her knowledge of the situation impressed Althea with its depth and accuracy. Jed appreciated the woman's hospitality after their difficult journey. Clara May treated him with respect despite his rough appearance and obvious military background. She seemed genuinely interested in helping them achieve their goals in the territorial capital. Althea began sharing carefully selected details about their investigation. Clara May's reactions appeared appropriately shocked and supportive. The innkeeper offered to introduce them to honest officials who might assist with their federal case against the illegal slave trade. The next morning brought disturbing news. Clara May reported that McGovern had arrived in town during the night with several armed men. He was asking questions about a woman and man who had been causing trouble at auction sites across the territory. Clara May suggested they stay hidden at the inn while she gathered intelligence about McGovern's activities. Her network of contacts throughout the town could provide valuable information without exposing Althea and Jed to unnecessary risks. Over the following days, Clara May proved invaluable as an ally. She brought news of McGovern's movements, identified corrupt officials to avoid, and helped them understand the political landscape they were navigating. Her assistance seemed too good to be true. Althea began documenting the territorial capital's role in the illegal network. The evidence pointed to systematic corruption involving judges, territorial officials, and business leaders. The scope of the operation dwarfed anything she had previously imagined. Clara May provided names and details that filled gaps in Althea's investigation. The innkeeper's knowledge extended to work camp locations, transportation routes, and financial arrangements that funded the entire network. Her information was remarkably comprehensive. Jed grew uncomfortable with how easily Clara May obtained sensitive information. His military experience had taught him to be suspicious of intelligence that came too readily. But Althea was grateful for any help that advanced their mission. The planned auction was set for the following week. Clara May warned them that security would be extremely tight due to concerns about federal investigation. McGovern had convinced other network leaders that serious threats existed to their operation. Strange inconsistencies began appearing in Clara May's information, details that contradicted previous reports. Knowledge that seemed too specific for someone outside the network, timing that felt suspiciously convenient for maintaining the status quo. Jed voiced his concerns to Althea during a private moment in their room. Something about their situation felt wrong, though he could not identify specific problems. His cavalry instincts warned of danger that remained hidden beneath apparent safety. Althea dismissed his worries initially. Clara May's help had advanced their investigation more in 1 week than they had accomplished in the previous month. The innkeeper's connections and knowledge were exactly what they needed to complete their mission. The breakthrough came when Clara May offered to arrange a meeting with federal marshals who could receive Althea's evidence directly. The proposal seemed perfect, eliminating the need for dangerous travel to distant territorial offices. Justice could be served immediately, but McGovern's behavior grew increasingly desperate rather than confident. Clara May reported that he was acting like a man under pressure from superiors rather than someone in control of events. His desperation suggested he was not the network's true leader. Jed's suspicions crystallized when he noticed Clara May's remarkable knowledge of their previous movements. She knew details about auction sites they had visited, people they had interviewed, and evidence they had gathered. Her information was too accurate for secondhand reports. The federal marshals Clara May promised to contact never appeared. Messages she claimed to send received no responses. Officials she recommended proved to be unavailable or untrustworthy. Every promised breakthrough led to more delays and complications. Althea finally confronted the growing evidence that something was fundamentally wrong with their situation. Clara May's help had been too convenient, too comprehensive, and too perfectly timed to be coincidental. The innkeeper knew more about the illegal network than any honest person should. The realization hit them both simultaneously. They were not hidden from their enemies. They were trapped by someone who had been manipulating their investigation from the beginning. Clara May's kindness was a carefully constructed deception designed to control and ultimately destroy their mission. The question now was whether they could escape before the trap closed completely around them. The truth struck Althea like a physical blow when she found her journal pages spread across Clara May's private desk. The innkeeper had been copying her investigation notes, adding names and locations to what appeared to be a master list of targets for the illegal slave trade network. Jed discovered additional evidence in Clara May's locked cabinet, maps showing auction routes across 3 territories, financial records detailing profits from hundreds of illegal sales, correspondence with corrupt officials that revealed the true scope of the operation. Clara May's network of inns served as coordination points for the entire illegal slave trade. Her establishments provided safe houses for transporters, meeting places for buyers, and intelligence-gathering centers that kept her informed of any threats to the operation. The woman they had trusted with their lives was not just connected to the network, she was its mastermind. McGovern appeared in the inn's doorway as they absorbed the devastating revelation, but instead of arriving as their enemy, he stumbled in wounded and desperate. Blood seeped through his shirt from a gunshot wound in his shoulder. His story emerged in broken fragments as Jed helped treat his injury. McGovern was not the network's leader. He had been blackmailed into cooperation after Clara May's people kidnapped his daughter 2 years earlier. Every illegal auction he supervised was conducted under threat to his child's life. Clara May had been using Althea's own investigation to identify families who had escaped previous raids. The evidence that was supposed to bring justice had instead provided target lists for recapture operations. Every name in Althea's journal represented people who were now in greater danger because of her work. The federal marshals Althea thought she was working with had been compromised from the beginning. Clara May's political connections reached into territorial law enforcement, ensuring that investigations were misdirected or abandoned entirely. McGovern revealed that Clara May had orchestrated their meeting at Morrison's trading post. She had arranged for Althea to be captured and sold, knowing that a federal investigator would eventually find her way to the territorial capital. The entire sequence of events had been carefully planned. Jed's military instincts took over as he realized their desperate situation. Clara May knew their location, their evidence, and their plans. She had been feeding information to her network while pretending to help them. Every advantage they thought they possessed was actually being used against them. The sound of horses approaching confirmed their worst fears. Clara May had returned with armed men to eliminate the threats to her operation permanently. McGovern's escape had forced her to accelerate her timeline. but she still controlled the situation completely. Althea felt the weight of her failure crushing down on her. Her investigation had not only failed to help the families she wanted to save, it had actively made their situation worse. Clara May now possessed detailed information about potential victims across the entire territory. Clara May entered the inn with calm confidence. Her motherly demeanor had vanished, replaced by the cold calculation of someone who had built a fortune on human suffering. She explained how she had manipulated every aspect of their investigation from the beginning. The innkeeper revealed that she had been tracking federal interest in the illegal slave trade for months. When she learned about Althea's undercover work, she decided to use the investigation to strengthen her own operation, rather than simply eliminate the threat. Clara May's plan had worked perfectly. She now knew the identities of potential witnesses, the locations of families in hiding, and the methods federal authorities used to gather evidence. Althea's months of dangerous work had provided intelligence that would allow the network to operate more efficiently. The 3 families from Morrison's trading post had been recaptured using information from Althea's journal. Dozens of other families identified in her investigation were now being hunted by Clara May's people. The evidence that was supposed to bring freedom had instead ensured continued bondage. McGovern's wound was bleeding more heavily as stress and movement aggravated the injury. He begged Clara May to release his daughter, now that his usefulness to the operation had ended. Her cold response confirmed that the child had been dead for over a year. Clara May had been using the threat of harm to a dead child to control McGovern's actions. The grief and guilt that had driven his cooperation were based on a lie designed to ensure his complete submission to her demands. Jed understood that traditional law enforcement offered no hope for justice. Clara May's political connections protected her from territorial authorities. Federal marshals had been compromised. The corruption reached too high for conventional solutions to succeed. Althea realized that their only hope lay in exposing Clara May publicly in a way that could not be suppressed or misdirected. The Territorial Harvest Festival would bring together the largest gathering of citizens in months. Community pressure might succeed where official channels had failed. Clara May dismissed their desperate plan with contempt. She controlled too many officials and had too much political influence for public exposure to threaten her operation. The community would believe whatever version of events she chose to present. But Althea remembered her years as a teacher. She had learned to reach people through clear presentation of facts and moral appeals to their better nature. Communities could choose justice when given accurate information and strong leadership. The festival was 3 days away. If they could survive that long and escape Clara May's immediate trap, they might still have a chance to turn their failure into victory. The evidence of corruption was now overwhelming, but it needed to reach honest people who could act on it. Clara May's confidence suggested she had already planned for their escape attempts. But she had underestimated the determination of people who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The battle for justice would be fought in public view under the bright sun of truth. The Territorial Harvest Festival filled the main square with families celebrating the season's bounty. Children ran between booths selling fresh produce, while adults gathered to discuss community business. The cheerful atmosphere provided perfect cover for what Althea planned to do. She and Jed had escaped Clara May's trap through McGovern's help. The wounded territorial official had guided them through back alleys while Clara May's men searched the main streets. His knowledge of the town's layout proved invaluable for avoiding capture. McGovern's grief over his daughter's death had transformed him from reluctant participant to determined ally. He carried documentation proving Clara May's control over the illegal slave trade network. His testimony would provide crucial evidence of the corruption's scope. Althea positioned herself near the festival's central platform, where community announcements were traditionally made. Her teaching experience had prepared her for public speaking, but never under circumstances like these. Everything depended on reaching people's conscience through clear presentation of facts. Jed stationed himself at strategic points around the square. His military training allowed him to identify Clara May's men as they moved through the crowd. The innkeeper had brought substantial force to silence Althea permanently before she could expose the truth. The moment came when festival organizers called for community business to be discussed. Althea stepped forward with her reconstructed journal, its pages now containing overwhelming evidence of systematic corruption and illegal slave trading across 3 territories. Her voice carried clearly across the crowded square as she began presenting her case. She identified herself as a federal investigator and explained how she had infiltrated the illegal auction network. The crowd's initial skepticism gave way to shocked attention as she provided specific names and dates. Clara May emerged from the crowd with smooth confidence. Her reputation in the community provided immediate credibility as she dismissed Althea's accusations as desperate lies from a disturbed woman. Her motherly appearance contrasted sharply with Althea's weathered condition after months of dangerous investigation. The innkeeper's counterattack was carefully orchestrated. She pointed to Althea's unconventional behavior, her association with the disgraced McGovern, and her wild claims about respected community leaders. Several corrupt officials in the crowd nodded agreement with Clara May's reasonable-sounding rebuttals, but Althea had prepared for this moment. She began reading names from her journal, identifying families who had disappeared after staying at Clara May's various inns. Community members recognized the missing people and grew uncomfortable with the mounting evidence. McGovern stepped forward despite his wound, carrying the documentation he had gathered during his forced participation in the network. His testimony provided insider details that only someone deeply involved in the operation could possess. The crowd listened with growing horror as he described the scope of the illegal trade. Jed brought forward the 3 families who had been scheduled for auction at Morrison's trading post. Their presence provided living proof of Clara May's crimes. Children clung to their parents as the families testified about their capture and planned sale into illegal bondage. The community's mood shifted dramatically as evidence mounted. Clara May's smooth denials became less convincing when faced with multiple witnesses and detailed documentation. Her political connections seemed less important than the moral outrage building in the crowd. Clara May attempted to turn the situation by appealing to racial prejudice and fear. She suggested that Althea was stirring up trouble that would bring unwanted federal attention to their peaceful community. Several residents nodded, preferring comfortable ignorance to difficult justice. But Althea's teaching experience served her well in this crucial moment. She addressed the community's fears directly while maintaining focus on the evidence. Her calm presentation contrasted with Clara May's increasingly desperate attempts to control the narrative. The breakthrough came when community members began sharing their own suspicions about Clara May's operation. Families had noticed patterns in the disappearances. Business owners had observed suspicious activities around the inn. The evidence had been there all along, waiting for someone brave enough to speak truth publicly. Clara May's network began collapsing as community pressure mounted. Corrupt officials found themselves isolated when honest citizens demanded accountability. The political protection that had seemed unshakable crumbled under sustained public scrutiny. Federal marshals arrived as news of the festival confrontation spread beyond the immediate community. Unlike the compromised officials Clara May had been manipulating, these law enforcement officers came from outside her sphere of influence. They carried legitimate authority and proper warrants. The arrests proceeded swiftly once community members provided testimony supporting Althea's investigation. Clara May's attempt to flee was blocked by festival attendees who had decided to support justice over comfortable denial. Her network's collapse accelerated as participants scrambled to cooperate with authorities. 6 months later, Althea stood before a classroom filled with children whose families had been rescued from illegal bondage. Her new position as official federal investigator allowed her to continue fighting the slave trade network while also teaching rescued children essential skills for their new freedom. Jed worked alongside her, using his military experience to track remaining network operations across the territory. His guilt over past mistakes had transformed into purposeful action that protected innocent families from the horrors he had once accidentally helped cause. The school they established provided education and safety for children affected by the illegal trade. Parents worked nearby farms provided by federal land grants intended as compensation for their suffering. The community they built represented hope emerging from systematic injustice. McGovern served as their liaison with territorial authorities, his insider knowledge proving invaluable for identifying remaining corruption. His daughter's memory motivated him to protect other families from experiencing similar loss and grief. A telegram arrived reporting illegal slave trade activity in New Mexico territory. Althea and Jed prepared for another investigation, their partnership now seasoned by shared success and mutual respect. The work would continue until justice reached every territory where such crimes occurred. As they prepared to depart, one of their students asked if they would return safely. Althea smiled, remembering how $3 had purchased not ownership, but opportunity for redemption and justice. They had learned that true worth came through actions that served others rather than personal gain or recognition.